Alright, so I just completed Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker yesterday. And I was gonna make this yesterday, but then I made the tier list video instead, and now I'm making this now. And this is gonna be like my review of not only Endwalker, but kind of the whole Final Fantasy XIV saga thus far in totality. Um, but let's just start with Endwalker because that's the most recent thing. My rating for Endwalker is not bad. Obviously, any part of Final Fantasy XIV, I'd say there's not a part of it that's bad. Um, Endwalker, is it as good as Shadowbringers? Obviously not. Nothing's gonna be as good as Shadowbringers, as far as I'm concerned, because Shadowbringers was so good. They really set the bar way too high with that one, and I don't see anything surpassing that in the foreseeable future. As the downside of that, it's that I have to compare everything to Shadowbringers now. If Endwalker came after Stormblood, I feel like I'd be like, yo, that was really good. But it came after Shadowbringers, so I'm just like, it's good, but it's not like a 10 out of 10. Um, I I'm torn though on where I would rank it with the other expansions. Like, is it better than Heaven's Word or not? I can't really say accurately. I feel like I need a bit more time to digest the story because the story did everything correctly. I can't fault Endwalker for doing anything bad, but I feel like after a certain point it was kind of routine. Um, to give an example, like towards the end of the game, they do that thing, and there will be spoilers in this. Obviously, I'll put spoilers in the title. Towards the end of the game, they do that thing that some stories do, where they kill off all the main characters one after another, and you're like, they're obviously not dead. I don't like when stories do that because it's like you don't feel anything about it. You're just like, oh, okay, they're dead, and then they all come back later. Like there's no real stakes. I feel like that's the main thing. By the end of the game, it feels like there's no real stakes because you know the good guys are gonna win, and when they begin to kill off characters, you know it won't stick. So you're just kind of watching stuff. That's how it felt for me for like the back half of Endwalker. It just felt like I was watching stuff unfold, and there were emotional moments, like with Urianger and Mumrida's parents. That was really good. Um, but for the most part, I just felt like I was watching stuff. I was always waiting for a big moment, like how at the end of Shadowbringers, when like you're fighting him itself, and then Ardbert's spirit shows up, and then he passes you the axe, and the music begins to play. I was so pumped for that moment. That was like the coolest moment I've ever seen in a video game, and I was waiting for something like that to happen, and nothing ever came. There were a lot of cool moments, but nothing that really made me go like, "Oh yeah, here we go, baby." It was just like, okay, yeah, that's kind of tough, you know, like when you fight Heidelin or whatever. You're like, yeah, I expected that to happen. So it felt kind of routine. It felt kind of like ironically low stakes, even though it's the end of days, the final days, the end of the universe. Despite that, it felt kind of low stake to me because I knew everything was going to turn out well, which is a weird thing to say because that is always the case in like every story. The good guys win, but you know, no one dies. There's no real lasting consequences. It was just kind of like, yeah. I mean, I guess Xenos died, but that's a whole nother. I'll touch on Xenos later. I hate Xenos so much. Um, but so I feel like while the story doesn't do anything bad, I never felt like super invested in it. Um, the first half of the story, like I'm not gonna lie, like the first half of Endwalker, the stuff with the Elsebard contingent and Thavnair, yo, I love that. That was a 10 out of 10 experience for me. When you go to Thavnair for the first time with Thancred, Urianger, and Estinian, just me and the boys, that was great. That felt like a Final Fantasy 15 like road trip. Of course, you have Thancred. He's like the dad, so he's the Ignis of the group. Estinian's the Gladio, and Urianger's the Prompto, because they're the funny guy. Urianger's the funny guy. He doesn't want to be. He doesn't mean to be, but Urianger is the Prompto of the group. But Thavnair is a beautiful place. Thavnair is just beautifully constructed. I love the colors. I love the music. It's fantastic. I love Thavnair. It's probably my favorite location in Etheris, I guess you could say. Um, so I definitely loved everything there. Radzadhan is super cool. Because I've always wanted to go to Radzadhan. They've mentioned that place so many times from A Realm Reborn to present day. I was always like, yo, what the fuck is Radzadhan? Because you can see it on the map, and I've always wanted to go there. And then I saw that we were going there, and I was like, yo, finally! And it surpassed my expectations. So I loved Radzadhan, Thavnair, and I loved the Ilsabard contingent. I feel like the Ilsabard stuff, the Garland Mold stuff, that was like peak Endwalker for me because it felt like the culmination of this long 10-year story. You had all the other characters. You had the tribes from the Azim Steppe. You had my girl Lise showing up. You had Pippin. You had Sickard and Monolane. You had all your kind of companions teaming up to go rescue Garland Mold, and it felt like the best conclusion to the Empire's kind of story arc. It's like, yes, this is how this should play out. And just like the tone they set in that region with you trying to help that one lady, and like she has a little sister, and then they try to escape because they don't trust you, and then they die, and then Alphino and Alizé are like hurt about that, and then you go in and talk to Quintus, and then he dies, and then Alphino and Alizé are upset about that. And I think there was another thing that happened that Alphino and Alizé were upset about, and I'm like, yo, these twins are not having a good week. But it really impacted, it really set the tone for that kind of story arc they were going with, and I thought all of that was done so well. Um, but then you get to the actual plot with like Fandaniel, and I hate Fandaniel, and Zodiark, after being built up for so long, he wasn't a threat. And it makes sense because it was only like 7/14, one half, I guess, of the true Zodiark, and he had no heart because Elidibus had already detached himself from it. So it was really just an empty, half strong husk of Zodiark. So like it makes sense, but it's not like exciting. It's a problem that I've had with like Bleach. Like in Bleach, Ichigo's friends are supposed to be the main character. You know, Chad, Uryu, Orihime, whoever. But does it make sense for these characters to fight captains and Espada and Sternritter? No, because they're just regular ass humans. So while it makes sense for Chad to lose every fight, is it fun to watch Chad lose every fight? No, because he's the main character. It's the same kind of deal here. It's like, yeah, Zodiark would not be a threat in this situation, but is it fun for a story for us to beat him that easily and that's kind of it for him? Not really. But they needed him to be like the impetus to start the final days because he was the only thing like holding it back. And like from a story perspective, it's all airtightly written, you know? It makes sense. It's just not that kind of interesting. It's not that exciting, I'd say. Fandaniel, most villains in Final Fantasy XIV I don't care for. Fandaniel is no exception. He's like theatrical. He's like fun to watch, I guess, to an extent. His Hermes flashback stuff, Hermes is a better character than the present day Fandaniel. Because when Shadowbringers ended and you're going into Endwalker, all I could think of is there's no way this is gonna be as good because their main antagonists are Xenos and Fandaniel, two characters who have no depth and whom I hate. And that was true from start to finish. Even though they did get some stuff, they did get some development, at the end of the day, it's like, this story's not going to be as good because it's with characters who I can't stand. So Fandaniel is like, yeah, they at least gave him more stuff than other Asians, like Nabrialis or whoever, who are just, you know, masked, faceless goons. So it's like, yeah, thank you for that. But apart from that, it's just like he's just a villain. I don't really care about most villains in this whole game. And then Xenos. I will never understand why they brought Xenos back. Stormblood, when Xenos first appears in Stormblood, and you fight him, and you can't beat him. I think it's in Rhalgr's Reach. You fight him there, you can't win. I was like, yo, finally, this is a good villain. He's a villain who you want to defeat, because they have you fight him multiple times throughout the story, and he's like this insurmountable kind of obstacle, and you want to defeat him, and then at the end you do, and you're like, great, that's how it should be. You know, with the other expansions, with Gaius, with Nidhogg, even with Emmett Selk, it's just like you never really feel like you want to fight him. You don't really like hate them as much as you should. Like, yeah, you should hate Gaius, but it's the first story arc. You don't really have that kind of attachment to the lore yet. With Nidhogg, who fucking cares about Nidhogg, you know? But with Xenos, they really go out of their way and they make sure that you do want to kill this guy. You know, he's a menace, and then you are able to do that by the end, and you feel real satisfied. And then they bring him back, and I was like, huh? Like, why bring him back? What purpose in the story? What role in the story is he going to serve? And the answer is basically fuck ass nothing, because he doesn't do anything for the rest of the story. Even in Endwalker, he's teamed up with Fandaniel because he wants to fight you, the main character, the Warrior of Light, the protagonist. He's just so enamored with you, and he's like seeking this thrill of fighting, that he's just like some guy in the background who's just like, I'll fight you one day, and he just feels like an afterthought. It feels like they brought him back for like popularity's sake, and then had nothing to do with him, and then just kind of threw him in randomly in Endwalker. He feels like kind of like Axel in Kingdom Hearts, where they bring him back because he's a popular character, and they try to give him a story arc, but then that story arc falls flat, and it doesn't mean anything. It's like, well, you didn't need to bring this guy back, you know? That's how it feels like, because by the end of Endwalker, like, Xenos is the final fight of Endwalker. You fight him because he's there, and it really just feels like a tacked-on thing. Like, I don't care about Xenos. I thought they were going to do something interesting, because a bit earlier on, I think it's like 2/3 of the way through, Xenos does show up to, like, fight you, and then Alizé bitches at him or something, and calls him a loser. And it's interesting, because by that point, you have been introduced to Fandaniel and Medion, and you understand, like, the kind of theme, I guess, of the story, like, why live? What is the point of living? What is happiness? And Xenos actually posits an answer to Fandaniel's question. This answer that had been eluding him for years. It's just, you know, it's something real two-dimensional and basic that Xenos would come up with, like, yes, like, I live for battle. Everyone has to find their own reason for living. And I'm just like, that's the answer Fandaniel's looking for. Xenos, of all people, it's Xenos, everybody. He's answered it. And I thought that was interesting. That's Xenos, because Xenos is the most bland character. He has no depth to him. He just wants to fight because he finds fighting fun. But that is something that can lean into a very vague and general question, like the one Fandaniel posited to Medion. It worked. And then they didn't really do anything with that. Like, Xenos does show up at the end of the game when you're fighting Medion, or rather the accumulation of despair from across the cosmos, but it doesn't really play into how the fight goes down. Like, you could have he doesn't contribute to the fight. I thought it was going to be something, like, really random or out of left field. Like, Xenos's joy of fighting somehow is able to offset the despair from the universe because he's just so one-dimensional of a character. Somehow his joy of fighting, his joy is comparable to all of the despair from all these destroyed planets. I thought they were going to do something crazy like that just to make sure his significance has a role in the plot, you know? But they didn't do anything with that. He was just there, and he felt like an afterthought, and I don't care about Xenos. But in Stormblood, I will say Xenos is a really good character. It's just, after that, I just don't know why they brought him back. The same can be said for other characters. Like, you kill Nidhogg in Heavensward, they bring him back. Have to kill him again. I don't know why they did that. You kill Yotsuyu, they bring her back. They kind of give her some backstory, but at the end of the day, it all just kind of feels pointless. They bring Gaius back. Gaius is cool, but my main issue with Final Fantasy XIV overall, in terms of the villains, is that they keep bringing them back. No one actually stays dead. Even Emmett Selk. he comes back as like a spirit in Endwalker, and it's cool, but it also just feels like a less cool version of the ending of Shadowbringers, where Grahatia like summons the heroes from beyond the rift. Like it feels like they're kind of repeating that, but like in a less cool way. Um, but yeah, like the villains, I feel overall are definitely the weakest part of Final Fantasy XIV overall. And that kind of impacts my rating, I guess, of Endwalker. Overall, I'd say Endwalker is still like a solid like 8.5 out of 10. It's only lower than Endwalker, which is a 10 out of 10, 100%. From start to finish, Endwalker just had me hooked. As soon as you start that story and then you go to Lakeland and everything's all purple, my favorite color, and the music is playing and you're like, wow, like what is this? It's so beautiful. It's so well done from start to finish. Like I like usually it takes me a month or so to get through a story arc, you know? Like it took me a full month to get through Endwalker, but that's because of the queue times and the holidays and everything. But even for Heaven's Word and Stormblood, it took me like a month to get through those as well, and then another month to get through all the post game stuff. For Shadowbringers, it took me like like a week because I was in love with that story arc. I was in love with that expansion. It was really good. Um, but as for the other ones, I feel like the objective rankings of the expansions are like from what I've seen at least online, it's always something like Shadowbringers, Endwalker, Heaven's Word, Stormblood, A Realm Reborn. And people really hate on A Realm Reborn because they say, oh, it's so boring. It takes forever to get into it. There's so many, like, random quests you have to do where you're just running errands. And yeah, that's true. There is a lot of kind of filler that apparently they've kind of cut out a lot of filler as the years go by, removing a bunch of superfluous missions here and there to kind of streamline it, which is, I guess, good, but I never had an issue with it. It did take me 8 months to get through Endwalker, I will say. Granted, 1 month was playing Horizon Zero Dawn, 1 month was playing Persona 5 Royal, 1 month I had COVID, so it really was like 4 months, 5-ish. I wasn't always playing, but it did take me 8 months to get to Heaven's Word, on and off. But in those 8 months, I never found myself being bored playing A Realm Reborn because there was always stuff to do. When you're first starting the game, I feel like if you try to just push yourself through the main story, you're not going to have fun. Any story, anything that you have to push yourself through to find enjoyment, you're never going to have enjoyment because you're pushing yourself. Like, I guess the idea is, you hear how good the later expansions are, so you want to get through the boring stuff first just to get to that stuff, but it's like, that's not going to be fun for you if you're just trying to get through, like, 3/4 of a game. If you're just trying to get your way through 300 hours of story content to get to the 400th hour where it's finally good, no, just don't do that. Have fun with The Realm Reborn. Try out different stuff. That's how you're supposed to play that game. You're supposed to just run around, do side quests, get accustomed to the lore, to the characters, to the universe. Try out being a culinarian. Try out being a botanist. Try out being whoever. Just try stuff. Have fun. Waste hours of your life just trying out everything. Play Triple Triad. Go to the Gold Saucer. That's how you're supposed to play your Realm Reborn. I've read stuff from people being like, oh yeah, I got all the way from like the beginning of the game to Heaven's Word within like 2 weeks. And I'm like, that sounds hideous. 2 weeks to go through all of those two story arcs? Don't do that. Like, what fun can you get from that experience? You're missing the world. You're missing the adventure. That's the whole point of who you are as the Warrior of Light, as Azem. You're supposed to be helping out people, doing side quests, saving people from their issues. Like, don't rush through it. That's not how you're supposed to play the game. So that's why I think A Realm Reborn, like, it is definitely the weakest in terms of like story, obviously, but I feel like it's where you're supposed to get hooked on the game. You shouldn't have to wait until Shadowbringers to be like, oh yeah, this is a good one, guys. Like you should already appreciate it from the start, because then you get to Heaven's Word. And if you can get over the fact that now Alphino sounds like a Victorian orphan and everyone's voices are different, then you're going to have a lot of fun, because that's when the story actually does get good. My theory is that with The Realm Reborn, they didn't really focus on the story that much because they were just trying to make the game playable from how horrendous the original release was. They wanted to make an actual game that was playable, that was fun, that was balanced, that had, all the workings of an actual MMO. And they were kind of like, yeah, we'll just make the story kind of whatever. That's not our focus right now. But once they had that foundation, once The Realm Reborn worked, they were like, all right, get in the script writers, get in the people who know what the fuck they're doing. Now, for Heaven's Word, we're going to make the story good. And they did. And Ishgard's fantastic. I didn't really realize it at the time, but by the end of Heaven's Word, like leaving Ishgard, I was like, yo, this place kind of sucks ass. It's so cold and snowy and it sucks, but I kind of fuck with it. Like, I'm going to miss Emmerich and Edmund and all those guys. Like, it was a really good story with really good characters, and you really did feel like you belonged in Ishgard. They really felt like family. It had a lot of good development for Alphino. Archifont's great, obviously. I think out of all of Final Fantasy XIV, the parts that I'll remember for the longest, that kind of stick out most prominently in my head, are the moments in Heaven's Word when you're traveling with Alphino, Estinian, and Azael. I think that was the moment where I was like, yeah, I'm playing Final Fantasy. I'm playing a real fucking story. Because you had like the 4-man group of these 4 characters who were all from different walks of life, who all have to bounce off each other in different ways. Like Estinian and Azael did not see eye to eye. And then there's Alphino, who's like a kid, and then there's me. Like, we're so 4 totally different people, and that's what makes, kind of 4-man RPG, Final Fantasy, like, teams work. Because you have these different people. That's why Final Fantasy, like, 15, for example, I don't think it works that well, because Noctis and his boys all come from the same place. They're all kind of homogenized. Yeah, they have, cooking, hiking, photography, whatever. But, like, they're all already friends. They don't really do anything to make that team, like, individualized almost. You're just like, yeah, they're friends. We're moving on. But with 14, and, like, other games, obviously, like 10, you have, like, Tidus and Waka and Yuna and everyone, and they all come from different walks of life as well. It's like the same thing with Heaven's Word. And I really enjoyed that journey with the 4 of us. I was sitting around the campfire, Estinian positing like his views on dragons versus Azael's views, and then Azael's whole like breakdown when she learns about the nature of her version of Shiva, and Horace Velger saying this and that, and it's all written so well, and just kind of the atmosphere of the settings you go through, where it's all snowy and cold and stuff, and then to the realm of the dragons, it all works so well. And it's really where I began to think, like, yeah, this is a good story. They're really putting in their effort. And yeah, there's not much I can say about Heaven's Word that is bad, to be honest. All the areas in that game, I feel like, are some of the best areas even to this day. Like the Chocobo Forest, kind of Giovanni and Forlands area. I think the worst is the Hinterlands, because there's only one Aetheryte. Actually, no. There's no Aetheryte. The only Aetheryte there is in Idleshire. So, fuck that place. Yeah, the Hinterlands sucks, but apart from that, I feel like the Churning Mists are really good. The Sea of Clouds is peak fantasy. I don't think we've gotten an area that's like as crazy as the Sea of Clouds. The last area of Endwalker is really cool because I wasn't expecting it. I'm just kind of bouncing back and forth between topics, but the last area of Endwalker I think is cool, despite me not really liking the back half of Endwalker because I do think it was kind of routine and lacking sort of agency. I wasn't expecting that to be the premise. I wasn't expecting to go to like the remnants of the Dragon Star or the world that Omega's from. This whole area is kind of just the end of the world from Kingdom Hearts 1, where that was like just an amalgamation of different parts of the destroyed Disney worlds kind of thrust together. Except this was like done a bit better because you had backstory for these worlds. If you played the Alliance raids and the raids like that, you know, like otherwise you don't really give a shit about the Dragon Stars and stuff like that and where Omega's from. But with that context, I never expected to be going to these places, is the thing. And just the kind of concept that these are all destroyed worlds and you get to see like the reasons for why these civilizations fell. In the last dungeon, the first area with like the aquatic shell people, and they're talking about how like their planet had some pandemic, some plague, and the reason that their society fell was because like the sick turned or the unsick turned against the sick, and you didn't know who to trust, and they just kind of like killed each other. I was like, man, this is kind of dark considering we're in a pandemic right now. Like, even though it's obviously not something that is gonna happen in real life, like in the back of my head I was like, yo, what if it does though? What if you all just like get to a point where we don't know who's sick or not, it gets that bad, and we just begin to kill each other? I was like, yo, this is this kind of sucks, you know? So the whole idea of it makes matters worse because the last area you go to in that zone is called Base Omicron, and we're going through the Omicron variant right now. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh man, this is this bodes unwell for us. So I think that was kind of funny. Base Omicron. I was like, Omicron is based, huh? It really is the final days. It was kind of ironic, I guess. But that being said, I don't think it's as good as the Sea of Clouds. I think of the Sea of Clouds from a design sense as just like, wow, they did it. They made the fantasy area. It was so cool. Since then, the only areas that I say that are really good are like, well, I'm not even gonna get into that right now. Let's just move on to Stormblood as a whole, because I think the zones in Stormblood kind of speak for themselves. They're not good. Half of them are just Girabania wastelands, and then the other half, they're all right, but then you get the Azim Steppe, which is just one big open field like the Dravanian hinterlands, and it's just not interesting. It's not visually stimulating. It really feels like they kind of phoned this one in, this whole expansion. All the zones kind of feel kind of phoned in. Except, I will say, the Ruby Sea. I really love the Ruby Sea, because I've discovered about myself, I really love kind of pirate settings. I love Tales of Berseria. I love the Pirates of the Caribbean level in Kingdom Hearts 3. It's my only world that I like in that game. I love The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. I even love the Orange Islands, the Pokemon filler from like, you know, the year 2000. Like, I love islands. I love piracy. I love the water, you know? In real life, don't get me on a boat. I will get seasick and throw up instantly. But fictionally, I love that kind of aesthetic. And so the Ruby Sea, I feel like, is really, really cool because I was about it. Yansha, it's alright. The music's so annoying. But, yeah, Stormblood, as far as the settings, the zones go, is definitely the weakest out of all of the expansions. But I will say this about Stormblood. Compared to Heaven's Word, I feel like Stormblood is written, has better pacing. The writing is more streamlined. You go to Girabania, shit doesn't work. You go to the Far East, you fix stuff there. You go back to Girabania, you fix stuff there. Boom, you're done. With Heaven's Word, they kind of had the issue of dealing with the new stuff while also dealing with the aftermath of A Realm Reborn, where you're like a criminal on the run from Ul'dah. And so it kind of felt like you were bouncing back and forth between two different plot threads, and it kind of felt kind of messy. Like, they wanted to focus on their new stuff while also dealing with the old stuff, and then also there's the stuff with, like, King Thornton, and it just kind of feels cluttered. And then, like, there's the Ascians and the Beast Tribe. There's, like, 5 different things happening at once. Whereas with Stormblood, it's, like, one thing. Revolution. Let's do this, baby. And then you do it. And I feel like, as far as following the story, being invested, I liked Stormblood more because I always knew what was kind of the focus of the story at the moment. I never had to, like, remind myself what was going on, like I did with Heavensward, where I kind of like lost track after a certain point, and I was like, wait, what does Thornton have to do with the dragons? Like, why are we fighting him? And then I had to like, remember. And then again, Lise is my favorite character, so her getting an entire expansion, or having an expansion revolve around her was really good because, I was already invested in her story, and so now I'm even invested in the overall story because of her. So I never felt boring. I read people say like, "Oh yeah, Stormblood sucks," and I really hate Lise. And then after I played it, like I hate Lise even more, and I didn't care about the story because they shove her down your throat. And I'm like, we must have played different games because from start to finish, like I was super supportive of Lise. I loved seeing how she developed, and there was never like a dull moment. Like how I was saying with the campfire scene in Heavensward, there's a campfire scene in Stormblood, in the Mole tribe with Lise sleeping, and you're talking to Cyrena, and that's another moment that I'll always remember. That whole arc with the Mole tribe, I feel like is really really good because there's this moment with Lise, because Lisa's whole thing is like, she wants to free her homeland from the Empire, and to her, home is that specific place. It's Girabania, Rogger's Reach, a la Ghana, I think is her village. But it's that spot of land. Whereas the moles, the Alra, I guess in general, they're like nomadic, so they travel. They don't have a specific place to call home, and that kind of, those different viewpoints in how they live their lives and what these people define as a home, Lise and the Alamegans versus the Alra, and how they move around, like it doesn't really come to any like big moment in the story, but just the fact that Lise has to be put against like her ideologies and beliefs versus someone else's, like I feel like it was really interesting writing to kind of have that dynamic, to kind of have her put up against a group of people who value things in an entirely different way that she does. Same thing with Gosetsu and his view of death versus the Dathal tribe and their view of death and reincarnation. I think when stories do that, it's very interesting, because it makes the characters think. Even if it doesn't play into like the grand scheme of things, it doesn't like really impact the overall plot. Just for that character moment, like you could tell that they really took something away from that, and it might impact little decisions of theirs later on. So I liked that kind of stuff for Lisa's character arc, and it made the writing very engaging for me. So even though Stormblood, I feel like it definitely is the weakest expansion, as opposed to Heavensward, Endwalker, Shadowbringers, I feel like it's not bad. Obviously, it's still good. It still focuses on characters who I really enjoy. And yeah, but if you don't like Lise, I guess it's the same thing with The Last of Us 2. If you don't finish that game thinking, oh yeah, Abby's all right, the game's not gonna work. So it's the same kind of deal. If you finish Stormblood and you never connected to Lise, you're not gonna have had a good time in that expansion. But then you get to Shadowbringers, and I've been saying it throughout this whole video. Shadowbringers is so good. I was not ready for how good Shadowbringers was. How I said the Sea of Clouds has been like the best area so far. I feel like that's probably still true all the way up until the last zone, the Tempest or whatever. When you see Amarat for the first time, I was like, whoa. I was not expecting this huge city in the darkness. I was like, where am I? Like, what game am I playing? It really just changed everything for me. I think Amarat is like the coolest fucking thing. And that entire ending segment, again, it's phenomenal. Nothing comes close. I don't even remember like the final bosses of the other expansions. That's not true. It's Gaius and like, well, it's Gaius and Xenos, and then the Meteon stuff. I don't remember who the final boss of Heavensward actually is. I would assume it's Nidhogg, but I don't actually remember, because I don't care about Nidhogg. But Elmerod, Emmett Selk, they really went above and beyond with Shadowbringers. Um, so unfortunately, because of that, Endwalker, I don't think was as good. But if Shadowbringers wasn't a thing and we did go from Stormblood straight to this, I'd be like, oh yeah, this is really good. It's really good. But since you had to throw in the best fucking Final Fantasy story ever right in the middle, um, so yeah, I guess overall I would agree that the rankings, like Shadowbringers, kind of Endwalker, Heaven's Word, Stormblood, A Realm Reborn, I guess that is a fair ranking. I feel like it's pretty much what I would say, more objectively speaking, or even subjectively. Because even though I do like Lys and I like Stormblood because of it, it's like, is it my favorite expansion? No. Like, I can't even rank it higher than anything else despite that. Because of, like, how lackluster the zones are. But nothing in this game is bad. And now that this whole arc's kind of wrapped up, I am looking forward to seeing what they do next. Because if you go to Mare Lamentorum, the moon, and you look at Etheris, the planet, and watch it just kind of rotate in real time, and you see all the continents, bro, Eorzea and the Far East, they're a small percentage of what this planet has to offer. So I want to go to Mercidia. I want to go to the New World. I want to go to all these places. They could really, have expansions come out for the next decade or two and still have so much to explore on this planet. Not to mention the underwater stuff. So there's a lot of ground for them to cover for their future expansions, and I can't wait to see what they do with it. It's kind of like the opposite of Kingdom Hearts 3 for me, where the ending of KH3, I was hoping for like a very definitive conclusion, like how they did with Endwalker. Like everything kind of got wrapped up, and now we can look forward to what's to come. With KH3's ending, it's more just like, oh yeah, we wrapped up kind of some stuff, but not everything, and the next arc is just, it's still a continuation. You have to play all this to get that. It didn't feel like an actual conclusion. It felt more just like an intermediary kind of, not even a filler arc, because it was important, but it just felt like stuff they had to get out the way to get to other stuff. And that kind of like turned me off of the future of Kingdom Hearts. I don't really care where that is going to go. But with Endwalker, they did wrap up everything in a conclusive way so that you could be like, yeah, I am looking forward to seeing what the next expansion is, because it's going to be a brand new story. Are we going to be fighting, the 12 now? Or are the 12 going to be upset that we've killed Hydaelyn? Like, there's got to be new villains, Maybe they can bring in the other Ascians who we never met. I hope not, because there are Ascians who we haven't met yet, like Pashtarat and Altima. There's like 4 or 5, I think, we haven't met yet. So they could do stuff with that's interesting. Hopefully not, because I do want all that Ascian stuff to be in the past. Maybe in like Alliance raids and stuff they can do with those guys. But I am looking forward to seeing what new stories we can come up with for future expansions and future arcs. Yeah, there's no real like closing paragraph to this video. Those are just my random thoughts. Endwalker definitely is like an 8.5 out of 10. The first half is definitely the strongest part for me. Oh yeah, Elpis. I didn't even really touch on that. People liked Elpis, like the zone, that arc, and I liked it too, but I feel like that's the part where Endwalker really began to drag for me, because it felt like for every important plot point there was with Fandaniel and Emmett Selk and Hythlodaeus and Vana, there was an hour of just like chasing around Medion or talking to birds and this and that. And yeah, it's an MMO, you're gonna be doing boring stuff for hours on end, but it really felt like they were just trying to force us to just do as much as possible to fill out the map before they could move on to the next step of the actual story. and it was really boring. I think I was stuck there for 3 days because I was just getting so bored at how slowly things were progressing, which sucks because the story is interesting, but I didn't like Elpis at all, and I think that really brings down my uh, review, my rank, my 8.5, and maybe it would have been a 9 before Elpis, but it really did drag the story for me. And why I say the first half of the story from the beginning through Thavnair, through the Ilsabard stuff, Garlemald, to the final days kind of starting, that is really good. But then the back half is Elpis, which is super. It's a drag, superlatively. And then the final zone, which is cool thematically and design wise, but from a story perspective, it's just kind of routine stuff, and I feel like there's no stakes, and it's just like, we're going through the motions right now. So that, yeah, the back half of Endwalker is not as engaging, I'd say, as the front half, where I was really enjoying myself. Um, but I am looking forward to seeing what's more to come. Uh, and I guess it's what, one expansion every 2 years. And I want them to bring back characters from the first, Reen and Gaia and them, because they're all really good characters. They were in like one scene in Endwalker, and it was unvoiced, and it just felt kind of like whatever. So I want them to figure out a way. I want Y'shtola to figure out how to travel between sunderings, reflections, and coalesce our forces. I think that would be great. I want to see Y'shtola do that. Um, so yeah, overall, Final Fantasy XIV definitely a 10 out of 10. Maybe like a 9 out of 10 overall, not a 10 out of 10, because some things do bring it down. So I feel like if I was to take all the scores for each expansion and kind of balance them out, it might just be an 8.5 out of 10 overall. I don't really know. Um, I'll just be nice. I'll say it's a 10 out of 10 experience overall. If you haven't played it, you can't, because they aren't selling it anymore, because, fun stuff, the servers aren't working. But when they get all that stuff worked out eventually, and you haven't played, I definitely recommend playing it because it is fun. I really love how, as the expansions progressed, they kind of moved further away from making it solely online, and they implemented more like single player features like the trust system. I love the trust system. Being able to go through dungeons and trials by yourself with your actual party members like Thancred, Alphina, whoever. I love it. I hate interacting with other people online. I have anxiety and I don't like talking to strangers. So having to team up with random people online to go through the story, I hate it. I know it's an MMO, like what am I doing with my life? Like this, obviously you would have to do that. But I do like how they're making it more and more of a single player kind of thing for people who prefer to do things on their own and also want to just experience the plot. If they can retroactively incorporate the trust system into previous expansions, I know there's like the command missions or whatever with your squadron to do stuff in a Realm Reborn content, but you have to do it already in the first place to get to that, and I feel like that it's not the same. So if they can somehow make it so that the trust system is expanded through all the expansions, so you can just do stuff on your own and not have to deal with people, I think that'd be fantastic. They should figure that out. Um, yeah, there's not really that many complaints I can think of for the game. Yeah, play it if you haven't. Even if you don't like MMOs, this is my first MMO. I think it was fantastic. And there's always a good time to be had. And the story, I can't stress enough, it is like the best Final Fantasy XIV story, especially Shadowbringers. Not even Final Fantasy, just in video games, I think it's one of the best. Just specifically Shadowbringers, but you have to get through the rest to get to that. But yeah, really good writing, really fun characters. Yeah, thanks for watching.